You mean the term lumberjack? Now, this lumberjack, way back in antiquity, I guess, where the word originated, because it's always been a common used word, and what the derivation of it is, where it was derived from, or what it was derived from, or I don't know. But where the jack came from, we will take the bird, the lumberjack, a gray bird. And I believe he took his name because he stuck around the lumberjacks, which he does. A whiskey jack is called a lumberjack.
Well, how about a whiskey jack? A whiskey jack is supposed to be the reincarnation of a dead lumberjack. And the reason it's called a whiskey jack has got nothing to do with whiskey. It's an Ojibwe term. And a whiskey jack is he who eats suet. And the reason for that is when you kill a caribou, for example, and open it up, the first guy on the spot is a whiskey jack for some suet.
My father was a shantyman, and there's a term that has died out, lumberjack. It's shanty boy and shanty man interchangeable, and so called by the shape of the buildings in which they lived, the one-way roof. Shanties. A crew went in the fall and built these one-way roof shanties for the men to live in, and this included, of course, a dining hall and stables for the horses.
There was no finish inside a lumber camp. You put up your log sides, your log ends, you cut your windows and your doors, you roofed it, tar papered it, and in the old days, you would chink them. You would chink them with moss between the logs. You lay one log on top of the other and you can see through it, can't you? Unless you're scribing. And you would drive moss into that, and then you'd drive a few nails, and then you would plaster them. Some used to make a mortar and plaster them with, as the ideal way, but in the old days we plastered them with clay. A log building, a log cabin is warm. You got a foot of natural insulation.
Just imagine a building made of logs piled one on top of the other, just saddle cuts. They were just scooped out. I mean, we weren't going to stay there that long. Nobody got fancy. And they were chinked with moss. The walls were about 6 feet high, and the ridge poles, of course, were another 6 feet high, and the boards were put on for the roof. And we had double bunks, and of course the top bunk then would be up about 5 feet high. One man underneath and one man on top.
I'll go back to the old wooden bunks. In the sleep camps, when I first went, we built all the bunks double out of poles. And you went out into the woods and you cut very small balsam or little spruce, or some even went down and cut a little poplar. That made your springs, see? And then you laid tar paper on them, and then you put hay on them from the barn. That was your mattress. Then you laid some more tar paper and a blanket permanently. That was your bed, your mattress, and the poles were your spring. They weren't very damn springy, you know, but they were double men. You slept 2 men in the bunk. And the bunkhouses were reasonably warm, yes. I'd never forget the first set of pajamas I ever saw come into a lumber camp. We were sitting around, and we had a young clerk. First time he'd ever been in a lumber camp, you see. So he brought a pair of pajamas with him. And this night, we were sitting in the office chatting about what happened in town the last month. And the van shuts down at around 9:15. That's the store in the office, the van. Up till 9:15, the rule was you could come in and get tobacco or anything you wanted, but after 9:15, that was it. I'm still in the 9 o'clock camp days where you went to bed. It was about 5 minutes to 9 when one fella came in from the sleep camp and said, "Oh, I got to have some tobacco. I forgot right up till now." And somebody said, "Well, the clerk has gone to bed, I guess." And he had. He was just getting ready for bed. So out he comes in his pajamas into the front office, and the guy looked at him, you know, and we all began to laugh. The guy looked at him, and he got the tobacco, and he backed out, and he went into camp, and of course, gee, that fellow in the office, he got pajamas on. There was 20 men in there in 5 minutes to have a look at this clerk. And my brother said to him, "Boy, you're taking a chance wearing pajamas around here, young fella." That actually happened.
And I'll tell you another thing I used to see them do. The guys from Manitoba, the Ukrainian fellas especially, they used to come in and they used to bring their own homemade socks and their own homemade sweaters out of wool. And they never bought anything in the van. These guys, you'd see them at night, they'd unravel their socks that had a hole in them, and they'd knit new ones. Now, you can't do that with store-bought socks.
There's one standing superstition, and that is the poplar log in a lumber camp. A Frenchman in the old days would not stay in a lumber camp where there was one poplar log. Mind you, the time come when we built the camps completely out of poplar to save the pine. I mean, where there was a good stand of poplar. But I have seen this in the old days. Frenchman or two or three had come into camp and, oh, no, get out. The foreman I worked over many years with was a Frenchman. That didn't bother him at all, and we had a lot of New Brunswick Frenchmen, and we had a lot of Ottawa River Frenchmen, but the odd one, yes, he was superstitious. Again, I give you another superstition. If a woodpecker come in the morning and pecked on that camp, 2 or 3 men would quit. Someone's going to get killed in that camp. I've seen it happen, and you couldn't dissuade them. No, they wouldn't. No, that was what they believed.
Yeah, I've heard that expression a lot. And the reason for that was that the poplar was supposed to have been the wood that they made the cross on which they hung Christ. But I never saw it bothering anybody. The reason the woodpeckers knock on those old log camps like that one that's in that picture is because the thing was full of bugs. And what they were doing was just knocking the bugs loose and eating them.
So we started to build the camps. He gave us kind of a rough sketch on paper, what he wanted, size, and the height of the walls, etc. And I would say we had 5 or 6 rounds on the sleep camp when he come up. And for nice handling and nice cutting, we took poplar. The minute he hit there, he said, boys, he said, I didn't tell you, but take it down. He wouldn't have that in it. He had some idea of bad luck. We even had to rake the chips and the cutting from the saddle of the log and burn them. He said, no chips, boys, clean them up. So we started over again, and we used jack pine to build it.
No, not until after the first war did I ever concoct a bathtub in the camp. But when I went to the woods, if you mentioned having a bath, they sent right downtown for what we called the yellow wagon. That was the man that you were out of your mind and come up and get you. I mean, that was the old joke. Don't talk about bathing because they'll send for the yellow wagon. You're nuts. This is true. The first few years I worked, nobody took a bath, no facilities. One thing we did do, and it was a rule, an unwritten rule, but a highly enforced one. Each Sunday you took off your underwear, your wool underwear, your Stanfields, and you washed it outside. You washed it and boiled it in pots, you know. Then you hung it on the line and you froze it dry. Monday night we'd go and pick up our underwear and our shirts. We'd bring it in, fold it, put it up on the shelf, and that was for changing Saturday night. And any man that didn't change his underwear went down the road. Lice, lumber camps were subject to getting lousy. We used a Sabadilla powder in the blankets, and a man that wouldn't change his underwear for a month was more liable to be carrying them than the man that changed it every week. So therefore, that was an unwritten law, but it was strictly enforced.
Yep, it was only 2 days, and we had them. Oh, they were there by the thousands. Them things, you know, you'd light a light, and they'll just skither like lightning. You know, we used to strike a match, and you'd think it was a Russian army going out the door. They fumigated the place, and we got stuff to put in the bunks and that, you know. We had to. We couldn't get any sleep. And then we had the body lice. It was very fortunate there was no head lice come in with them. There's 2 classes. I guess they were paid more than the others.
Them days, the only time there was for any singing would be on Sunday. Lights went out, you know, at 9 o'clock, and if you were a teamster, you'd just be getting back from the barn, you know, from carrying and fixing up your horses and one thing and another. And on Sunday, they'd maybe have a stag dance, you know, or a few songs.
It took quite a bit of confidence to stand up before 80 or 90 men. You generally stood up in the deacon seat. That was the seat that continued to run right around the camp where you sat. And he'd stand up on that and belt her out. And so it took a little confidence in your ability to do that.
And her to her fortune that jewels and rings, and her to her fortune that many fine things, and her to her fortune that money in pounds, and a rich store of treasure, and a rich store of treasure, and 20 silk gowns. Oh, the day was appointed and the money all there, when I spoke this young man who is now in despair. I know she's your daughter so fair, but it's now I'll not have her without your grey mare. But it's now I'll not have her, but it's now I'll not have her without your grey mare. 3 weeks after, or somewheres about, he met this young damsel one day walking out. Oh, says he, do you know me, my darling, says he, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I've seen you, said she, or a tall man like you with the long waving hair. Oh, once came a courting, oh, once came a courting, my father's grey mare.
Big Ole. Of course, all Swedes were Olish, you know, in those days. I never heard another name for him. It was always Ole. But he would get up and sing. His specialty was the jam on Jerry's Rock. Well, he talked English with Swedish pronunciations or of some of the letters, and I've always remembered that. He would get up and he would belt it out. He wasn't too good a singer, but he was a hell of a good crier. And he would get up and when we come to the chorus, to break the yam on Jerry's Rock went for young Monroe.
6 of our brave Canadian boys did volunteer to go to break the jam on Gary's Rock with their foreman, young Monroe. They hadn't not been there very long, and the boss to them would say, I'll have you and your guards be boys, for this jam will soon break way. His words were hardly spoken till the jam did break and go, and it carried away those 6 brave youths with their foreman, young Monroe.
The Americans had a parody on that, you know, which some of them used to sing just for fun. And the parody on certain lines of that was, and the 9 brave Canadian boys were drowned and the oxen swam ashore.
Don't get the wrong idea about lumberjacks. Here is something that I feel very strongly about. These guys came to us. They came from Manitoba. They were Ukrainians. We get a bunch of guys from down around Sault Ste. Marie. We had a bunch of guys from Thunder Bay. And they all came to the camps with one reason and one reason only. They wanted to make a few bucks. And all they were looking for was some decent wood to cut, a decent place to sleep, a decent grub on the table. This business of these guys fighting and brawling and all the rest of the camp, that's BS.
We started, I think, with, the simple games. 2 of the outstanding ones was the bag fight, similar to a pillow fight between kids, only we used oat sacks stuffed with 5 or 6 loose, empty oat sacks again. We had big camps those days, you know, maybe 80 feet long. Then the idea was to knock your opponent off the ridgepole. You rode that like you did a horse, you know. And so you were riding a pretty wide pole there, you see, and the thing was to knock you off of that. And our foreman was very enamored of this game, and he thought he was pretty good at it, and he used to come in and challenge anybody every Saturday night, and that was generally his part in the contribution, or he'd stick around and see some of the other, weigh the big sheep. That's another one, was where you self-appointed MC would say, all right, dozen fellas sit in a circle here, and he covered them all with a blanket. And the idea of the game was to catch the greenhorn, the new man. You went through a little rigmarole to weigh and guess the weight of each man he lifted and so forth, and keep track of how far you wear out, and what the fellow said, you're low or high, or you're above or below, and until we finally come to the victim. And when he got him raised up, an assistant placed a big dishpan full of cold water, and he was set back and down in that, and that was the surprise element of the game, and the game was over. Actually, besides a little rough and tumble, there was no serious element in any of our games. Nobody was meant to be hurt or anything. It was just to get a laugh at their expense.
Hey, I'll tell you something that I saw that I don't think anybody else has ever seen. I was standing out on a lake one fall, and I was right at the edge of the lake. It was very late, very, very late in November, and it was a fairly big lake. And we had a campsite in there. We were timber cruising, and I'd just gone down the lake to get a drink of water, and I got my drink of water, and I was just standing out there looking across the lake. It was so damn nice. And all of a sudden, there was a little noise like the tinkle of Peter Pan's bell, and the whole bloody lake froze over.
That was the winter work. There was a certain number of us. I worked on the drive every year I was in the woods, working in the woods. I liked driving, log driving, river driving. But the bulk of them came out and worked in the sawmills in the summer. There was a regular pattern. You worked in the sawmills till early in the fall. Sometimes you would have to stay through till the mill closed down. You were deserting the thing, but if arrangements could be made, another fellow took your place. Then you headed for the harvest, and you worked in the harvest, and you returned from the harvest just in time to go back into the lumber woods. It was a cycle. Into the woods, back out, on the drive, either on the drive or out to town in the spring, into the sawmill.
The lumberjacks used to come in the spring, you know, and blow the money. Oh, yes, that was, yeah. And they would have, sometimes they would have Oh, several $100, you know, like, you know. Blow it all in, just crazy. Just
The first
crazy.
thing they did, they would have to get dressed up. I mean, that was a must. You got dressed up. And then you went and spent the rest of your money in the bar. If you were lucky, you lasted the week. If you were unlucky, somebody rolled you in a day or two, and your chums held you up till, well, we better get back to drive, or we better get down to the mill and go to work, see? It all tied in seasonally. But I remember March. I still like March because when the snow began to melt and the roads got dirty and sloppy and the dirt began to show up a little, that was just right. We were going to town.
No, I wouldn't. I don't think so. A lot of jack pine farmers, that's all. What they call jack pine farmers. They just cut cordwood and when they know. And
You might get the odd camp through the woods
So-
yet, but in our district, I couldn't think of one. Unless he's a small jobber, what we call jippos. 2 or 3 men will go into the horse and they will skid and buck on a landing. But the ordinary woods worker now, we have to pretty near depart from the word lumberjack nowadays.
I tell you what, those guys that used to cut in those days, they had pride in their what they could do. Those were the days when people took pride in being a woodsman. There are two kinds of people. There are woodsmen and there are woods workers. A woodsman is a guy who takes pride in what he's doing. He's a craftsman. He produces a quality job every day, every time, anywhere. A woods worker goes into the bush. He doesn't do any more than he has to get the money that he wants.
There was a certain longing as the fall days set in to get back to the bush. I mean, you do the same thing year after year, and there's an attraction there. Well, time to go to the woods again, boys. And you were happy to go, and you were happy to get out.
Yeah, I think I did like it. I wouldn't know. No, I liked it at the time. You know, it's kind of nice to be out there, in the middle of January or something. The temperature's about 20 below zero, and it's a cold night, and the sky is so full of stars that you could read a newspaper at 40 feet. And up on top of a hill not too far away, you hear a wolf howling. That is really nice music. That is really nice, and I haven't heard it for years. I miss it.